Do we need a paradigm shift? Well, let's hear it from our expert,
Mr. Harish Kartik. Harish has over 15 years of experience that includes about 8 years in functional consulting in logistic execution domain across various industries, verticals such as LSP, retail, automotive, manufacturing, and CPG across the globe. He has worked on various types of logistic assignments, including strategic consulting, value assessments, end-to-end implementations. Harish has a strong functional understanding and technical knowledge of logistic IT applications. Please welcome Harish.
First of all, a big thank you to all of you over here to be here on a Friday evening. And I know most of you would have probably already started your weekend, or the rest of you would be looking forward to it. And the topic of my presentation is speed, and my hosts have advised me to incorporate a little bit of this into the pace of my presentation so that we can all get into the weekend mode a lot faster. So I'll try to probably meet a little bit of that. All right, as some of our preceding distinguished speakers have actually talked about in their presentation earlier, let's start off with some news flash that I'm sure most of you have seen. And the message that Dr. Chris was trying to give in his presentation was that change, I guess, is inevitable, right? And as Mr. Book also alluded to in his presentation, obviously there's lots of action that needs to be done by the government and the various policy makers in this region. Now, I'm sure you have seen some of these news clippings over the last couple of years. And essentially, what this is pointing to is the fact that the speed with which change is happening around us is actually increasing more and more rapidly. Right? Now, another significant data point, if you see the global Fortune 500 list of companies in 1991, now since 1991, and if we forward that to about 20 years, to 2011, we know that this phase was characterized by explosive growth in the areas of technology and innovation, right? 20 years down the line, in 2011, you would be surprised to note that actually out of the original Fortune 500 companies, 75% of those companies ceased to exist, right? Now, many of these were companies which were more than a few hundred years old. And that's a very short span for organizations to vanish overnight. Now, what this also signifies is that organizations not just have to cope up with change, but they have to innovate in order to cope up with that change. And obviously, we all know the guru of innovation. I'm a big fan of Mr. Steve Jobs himself. And even when we actually talk to a lot of the CEOs, we constantly keep in touch with the CEOs. And if you actually talk, and this survey, which was done about last year, where we actually spoke to more than 250 CEO of global corporations spanning 25 countries, they also alluded to the fact that their number one priority was sustainable growth through innovation, but also at the same time, the ability to control the cost of that growth. So, all this essentially would mean that organizations should actually be focusing a lot on innovation, right? But surprisingly, we also find that of the total spend, the total budget that organizations actually have, it's only about 63% of that is still used in running the business. That is just keeping the lights on in their organization. And about close to 21% is actually invested in growing the organization. But a very small percentage, only to the tune of about 15 or 16%, is actually pumped into innovation. So the reality is that in spite of so much of change and the pace of change happening around us and the clear need for innovation, the reality is that the people on the ground, the real executioners in organizations, are challenged with this question as to how do we innovate for competing with the rapidly growing competition that's happening in the marketplace, as well as the extended supply chains. Now, I remember when I was a student of business, Mr. Philip Kotler has talked about the 4 P's of marketing, and I'm sure you've probably read that somewhere. We talk about product, we talk about pricing, we talk about promotion, and then there is one P which I'm not sure if many of you remember. And of course, the 4 P's since then have probably become the 6 P's or have become the 7 P's, or I don't know how many P's there are right now. But the one P that is actually always left towards the end is place, right? Which basically is distribution or logistics. And this is something, I don't know whether maybe it's not as glamorous as product innovation, or it's probably not as glamorous as promotion, innovation in promotion, or maybe not as charming as financial innovation. But the bottom line is that the distribution side of things in most organizations is something that is really looked upon as a last lever for growth. So essentially, summarizing what Dr. Chris and Mr. Book was also telling about, the need for the governments to basically innovate, there is also an equal responsibility on organizations themselves to focus on logistics innovation. That needs to increase. The speed of logistics innovation needs to increase by organizations themselves, while the rest of the government, the policymakers, etc., do their bit of increasing the cooperation, and as we move towards AEC 2015 and of course other such initiatives that are underway. Now let's look at it from the AEC 2015 point of view, right? So we all know that there are AEC 2015, essentially what does it mean for us? There is going to be a larger geography, it's going to be a sub-region within ASEAN. We know that there's going to be removal of trade barriers and so on and so forth. But really, from a logistics imperative point of view for organizations, what it essentially means is that supply chains are no longer going to be constricted by geographical boundaries. It's not just about my customers, but even my sourcing. The supplier base that I as an organization can source from is also going to get longer and further and more competitive. As organizations also do trade and do business in other countries, they are going to be having to compete with the local strong men, the local strong organizations who are already deeply entrenched, which means there is a significant need to differentiate yourself with competition more as AEC 2015 sets in. So essentially what we're saying is logistics is and should be a key focus area as we step into and gear up for AEC 2015. Okay, so I'm sure most of you, here are from the supply chain and logistics background, but just very quickly, just look at the overall supply chain, right? The logistics part, the supply chain execution, as we call it. And typically this process starts right from the time a customer or a consumer places an order. There is an order capturing process that is involved, followed by, having to plan for that order. Where are we going to distribute it from? Where are we going to dispatch it from? And moving on to other attributes like execution, monitoring that particular transportation move as it goes along its life cycle, and finally, of course, having to settle or pay for that transportation, for that movement, logistics move. So essentially, the two key components that really comprise this overall order fulfillment life cycle is the transportation bit and, of course, the warehousing bit. What happens within the 4 walls of the organization, and of course, while the goods are in motion outside. And why is this very important is because logistics, number one, is a significant percentage of revenue for most organizations. And for organizations which are in the consumer product group industry, it could be as high as 12% of their overall revenue, which is a significant number for organizations to look at. And then when we drill down into that logistics cost, the cake, the two key pies or the two key contributors to that logistics cost are transportation and warehousing, which contribute nearly 65% of that logistics cost, which means there is a sizable value waiting there to be unlocked by organizations by innovating the way they execute, they plan their transportation and warehousing. So Oracle as a applications organizations has a complete modular as well as a futuristic suite of applications specifically focusing on this logistics piece, what internally we call in Oracle as the value chain execution. While there are various components of it, the two key pillars for this logistics execution suite of applications are the transportation management piece and the warehouse management piece. And we'll talk about these as we go along in this session. Okay, so we've been talking about transportation. Now, translating all of that we said, change and innovation, is transportation really something that we can, do some innovation in? And this comes with the fact that typically when you look at transportation or, the perception that most people have about transportation is that transportation is all about execution, right? It's all about getting some orders, planning some movements, doing some booking with your freight forwarders or your expediters, doing some track and trace and visibility, and finally, of course, settling, doing the financial transaction. But believe me, transportation is much more than that. It's not just about execution. It is also about tactical way in which transportation actually impacts organizations through areas such as the way organizations source for their freight through negotiations and discussions with their transportation partners. By having a historical way in which they have shipped, is there a particular pattern that we can evaluate out of that and then probably choose to deploy some dedicated resources to unlock some value? That's what we call as transportation pattern recognition. That's the tactical way which we can look at transportation. And of course, sitting on top of the pyramid is the strategic bit about transportation, which is the complete network analysis and the what-if scenario analysis, the simulations part, and of course, having a completely performance-based improvement mechanism put into place, which calls for monitoring of the KPIs and the metrics as far as the transportation is concerned. So let's look at how Oracle solution actually addresses each one of these three layers of transportation. So OTM, or Oracle Transportation Management, is a best of breed transportation solution that has evolved over the last 13 years, in the short span of actually 13 years, I would say, to become the undisputed leader in the transportation management space. And in this growth over the last 13 years, OTM has become a rich, what I mean by rich is, it's not just become a broad platform that addresses any type of transportation requirement, but also has become a very deep product by having very rich feature functionality that can handle and address any level of complexity in an organization's transportation business process. Today, this product has 10 modules or 10, I would say, broad areas of footprint which go together to address any kind of transportation requirement. So let's look at how the various functionalities address those three areas, the strategic, tactical, and execution space. Starting off with the strategic space, the Oracle Transportation Management Logistics Command Center functionality helps organizations in doing precisely the what if and the simulations part. And linking this back to our AEC 2015 initiative, which we're all gearing up for, when we say that it means elongated supply chains, more susceptibility to market disruptions, competitive landscape, having to rejig my distribution network, probably the need to open up newer distribution centers. But before you kind of do or take up any of these and put them into action, I'm sure that the supply chain heads of organizations want to really see what if this strategy doesn't work, or what is going to be the impact of opening up a new distribution center in, say, Myanmar, or in, if a Thai organization wants to expand into Malaysia, where should I be strategically placing my distribution center? Which particular port should I use to get into Indonesia? What happens if that particular port has service disruptions for the next 6 months? What if a particular transportation service provider goes out of action? Or if there is a sudden increase in fuel prices, how does that impact my overall distribution model? These are some of the typical use cases that this particular functionality or module within OTM can help address these kind of questions. Next, as the old adage goes, you can only manage that you can measure, right? And that's where the business intelligence capability of OTM helps you derive and set the key transportation metrics and KPIs, and helps you to identify the levers of transportation that need to be tweaked for improved performance as well as for reduced cost. And you can do this by slicing and dicing the data. You can look at the logistics performance, sitting in Thailand as a Thai organization, we can know whether in Malaysia are performing as per the metrics or the benchmarks that we have set as an organization in Thailand. We can know what is my cost per ton of distribution, for example, in the Philippines, if you want to do business over there, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, this gives you the ability to slice and dice the data by different periods of time, as well as to drill down into the transactional values that may result in any outliers or any anomalies in your metrics cropping up, and being able to take corrective action. That's the strategic part of how OTM, or Oracle Transportation Management, can add value to both the logistics service providers as well as the corporate shippers, that is the organizations who want to send their products from A to B. Now coming to the tactical part, sourcing, right? So most organizations, they would need to negotiate your freight contracts maybe every quarter or every 6 months, or at a slightly longer time than on a daily basis. And that's where it's imperative for organizations to be able to look at the way the historical contracts have been laid out, which are the carriers who have been performing well, or those carriers who have not been giving good service to us as an organization. That is being able to develop a carrier scorecard, and then bringing about the intelligence derived out of the historical way of shipping or the carrier performance into the entire negotiation process. And that's where the inbuilt sourcing capability of this product can help you achieve that. So, a lot of organizations use auctioning tools, there are web-based platforms which are there. But the key difference between OTM sourcing functionality and those products is you're able to look at the complete historical shipments as well as a carrier performance within the framework of the application itself. Sorry. Yeah. And then, of course, coming to the execution bit. As far as execution is concerned, we all know the end-to-end life cycle. So OTM receives the orders, the transportation orders, on a day-to-day basis. And these could be orders which are outbound, that is delivery from your warehouses to your customers, or it could be inbound, that is orders coming in from your suppliers into your manufacturing facilities or your distribution centers. Once it receives those orders, OTM plans those orders into shipments. That is the way the orders need to be delivered, by looking at all the real-life constraints of your rates, your transportation contracts, your equipment availability, your carrier availability, your different modes of ability to ship through various modes. It evaluates all the permutations and combinations and becomes a decision support system for the logistics executives to recommend the least cost shipment. Once the shipments are formed, OTM helps you to collaborate with the various stakeholders, specifically the transporters, by tendering the shipments to them or by talking to the various ocean service providers, and gets the acceptance back from them. And once the shipments start moving, that is, once they leave the facilities, then OTM also helps you to monitor those shipments while they are in their life cycle of journey, and forewarning you or proactively alerting the various stakeholders of any anomalies or any delays or any accidents or anything en route which is not supposed to happen. It can proactively alert the stakeholders so that corrective action can be taken immediately rather than having to wait for something more drastic to have happened. And then, of course, when the goods are delivered to their eventual destination, then OTM also helps organizations to do the settlement part. That is, from a logistics service provider perspective, it can help you to raise the invoices to the customers to whom they are providing the services. Or from a shipper company, it can tell me how much should I pay to the carriers for the services that they have rendered to us. And then, of course, sitting on top of all of this is the comprehensive ability to generate reports and metrics and so on and so forth. So that's exactly how the various modules or the various functionalities inside of Oracle's transportation management solution are able to address the strategic, the tactical, as well as the execution piece of the transportation business process. Now, having said that, because we are getting into the elongated supply chain, and we know we have still not reached a stage like the European nations where there is currency unification and trade unification. We are still far away from that. So there are other business imperatives as well. For example, we will need to do the settlement or being able to pay for transportation in multiple currencies. There is also going to be a need to be able to show the screens or the data in various languages. There is also going to be a need to be able to meet the tax obligations of each of those organizations. And OTM does all of this by having this ability to execute your business process uniquely in each one of those countries or the business lines. And of course, being a single instance deployment for an organization, even though you might have a presence in various countries, it means it's a single infrastructure for organizations to manage and maintain and administer. So it reduces the overall cost of ownership. Well, I've talked a lot about OTM and its capabilities, but this is also reciprocated by the leading analysts in the world. And one such analyst is Gartner, who continuously rate the various IT applications between each other. And they do this also specifically for the transportation management system. And if you look at the last transportation management system, Magic Quadrant, which was released as of August 2012, the next one is due probably any time now, and we really wouldn't be surprised with the results. It's going to be pretty much the same, I would guess. But if you look at this last report, you would notice that Oracle has been placed as the undisputed leader in this TMS space. Now, one additional point that I would like to make is that this particular graph is supposed to be read in two axes, right? So one is the x-axis, which is the completeness of vision. Now, what that means is, what is the roadmap of the product? How stable is the product going forward? Right? A lot of organizations can just do this by PowerPoints and everything, right? But then that's where you look at the y-axis to say that what is the ability to execute? That is, how real is the product or the solution today to meet the real life challenges of today's transportation needs? And if you look at this, in both the dimensions, Oracle is the undisputed leader. Now, having said that about August 2012, if you pick the Magic Quadrant for the last 6 years or 7 years even, you would find that the one thing that has been constant is that Oracle has always remained as the #1 TMS globally. But what has changed in these last 6 years is the gap that OTM or Oracle has with its competitors on this graph, which is increasing year on year, which means that Oracle is fast outpacing the competing solutions as far as TMS is concerned. And this has also been reinforced by over 500 successful implementations globally across various geographies and various industry sectors, be it retail, be it CPG, be it cement manufacturing, be it chemical logistics, be it discrete manufacturing, or the logistics service providers space. And as you can see over here, OTM is not just adopted by the so-called big boys of the industry, right? So while, yes, we do have a lot of the big boys like the DB Schenkers, the Kuehne+Nagels, and the APL Logistics and the Tolls of the world, but OTM has also equally been adopted and has helped mid-tier organizations as well as the emerging organizations to leapfrog and to differentiate between their competitors, from their competitors. So, having said all of this, some of the classic benefits that a TMS or OTM specifically has brought to our customers, the 500 that we saw, summarizing all of that, and the business areas that we typically saw people should leverage TMS for. By deploying OTM, organizations can look to save up to 20% of their freight cost by doing tactical or the freight sourcing by deploying OTM. And then in the complete execution piece, by efficiently planning their shipments better, we can look at reducing up to 25% of the freight cost. Moving on, through better monitoring and better execution, there is a further reduction of up to 5% of the transportation cost. And last, of course, through a streamlined financial settlement and audit, there is more than the compliance part, of course, there is also a significant reduction by reducing the administrative costs associated to paying the invoices and doing the settlement. And this, of course, are just the hard number savings. But in addition to this, there is also the intangible savings of huge amount of productivity improvement, efficiency improvement, and so on and so forth. So that's about the transportation piece, the Oracle transportation piece. And I would like to now invite upon my colleague Sundar to actually take you through the warehouse management piece. Thank you.